For more on this, let's bring in NBC News legal analyst Misty Marris. Misty, good to have you with us. At the root of the issues here between the federal government and Minnesota officials is the fact that Minneapolis is a sanctuary city. Talk about what that means and how that has been playing out here over the last few weeks.
Okay, so we have two constitutional principles at play. First, the supremacy clause, which means that federal government, like federal law enforcement operations, cannot be impeded by the states. But then we have another principle called anti-commandeering, which says that states do not have to enforce federal operations like immigration operations. So what does that set up? That sets up the path for sanctuary cities, which says that and states, which says that these areas do not have to enforce federal law. They can't impede it, but they don't necessarily have to cooperate. And that's a lot of what we heard today in Homan's speech.
And specifically, the issue that came up with Homan is this idea that if someone is undocumented and they're also in jail or in prison, whether ICE has access, whether local authorities, the sheriff's department, the police department will cooperate with getting that person into ICE custody. Homan seemed to suggest that perhaps he had some sort of deal or agreement with the attorney general, with local officials, that would give ICE more access. We haven't heard from the attorney general or the governor about this yet, but talk more about what it sounds like we were hearing there.
Yeah, so those two constitutional principles, nice in the academic sense, but what does it mean practically? And really those ICE detainer orders are where there is a flashpoint when it comes to practical enforcement. So what ICE detainer orders say is that if somebody is going to be released from prison and they're here illegally, that ICE can actually take custody of them to hold them for a certain period of time so ICE can take over. Or in other instances, an agreement that they will be advised when someone is going to be released and then can move forward with their own law enforcement operation. So what does that mean? Well, legally, federal courts have found that those ICE detainer orders aren't compulsory, meaning the state has a choice about whether or not they actually want to comply. Seems what Homan was saying, and again, we have not heard from the attorney general, was that there had been an agreement that they would comply with those ICE detainer orders and would be advising the federal government as to when individuals were going to be released so that ICE could then take over from an enforcement perspective. And that's a big change. So President Trump had said multiple times that Minnesota was not complying. So I don't know whether or not they have been. Tim Walz had taken the position that they have been in the past, or whether this is new, or whether this is just more of a formal agreement between Homan and the state.
And that begs the question, then, would this be enough to satisfy the federal government? Would this sort of be the focus of their operation moving forward, as opposed to all the criticism that basically these agents are all over the streets there? They're bothering people who have done nothing wrong, who might even be U.S. citizens, because that is one of the big tension points right now between federal and local authorities. We should also mention there has been a lot of action in the court. Local officials have gone to federal court to see if there's anything they can do to try and stop or change these operations. Where do things stand with that?
Joe, there's been so much activity in the courts, and even just this week, some significant activity. So there were arguments earlier this week relating to a federal action brought by Minnesota asking for Operation Metro Surge to stop, or at least scale back considerably. So arguments were heard on that earlier this week. There's yet to be a decision. I'm wondering if, given this pivot in the administration's basically operation that they're conducting in this more targeted approach, will that issue become moot, or will that be the government's argument as that continues to play out? There was also an argument on preservation of evidence when it comes to Preddy. The state and attorney general stepping in and saying, we need a court order to ensure that the federal government is actually preserving critical evidence because the state has been excluded from participating in the investigation. And then most recently, an order by the Chief Justice of the federal courts in Minnesota saying that the ICE acting chief has been violating court orders. He needs to appear in person to explain why he should not be held in contempt, because there are all these individuals who are detained who are entitled to hearings. Those hearings have yet to be held. So that's another significant issue. All of this playing out this week, and issues that continue to unfold.
All right, Misty Marris, a lot to cover. Thank you so much. Appreciate your expertise here.
Thank you.